people that were just absolutely shocked that this guy who had been talking so long about caring about Indigenous people would be bragging about going out and selecting this particular guy to lay a beating on him to help make political hay? Are you kidding me?
In a previous video, we explored whether or not Trudeau was groomed for his position as Prime Minister of Canada. Thus today, we explore some further evidence that suggests Justin Trudeau has been primed to be one leader of an elitist plan for the world nudged along by the people at the World Economic Forum, a plan that appears to sneak around the democratic process altogether. Here to continue this Trudeau breakdown is Richard Garner, a media expert and host of a Third Way podcast. Richard, what do you have for us today?
Well, good to be back and with Trudeau Part 2. You used the word primed. We used the word groomed, I think, in the last piece. Tomato. But the question is, I think, a very relevant one, especially with all the talk these days about the Great Reset, about the World Economic Forum. And again, not something you call a conspiracy because it's out in the open. It's an espoused worldview advocated by the world's most elite politicians, business people, monarchies, etc. A lot of people don't have a problem with it because they're espousing utopian type visions for the world, climate change under control, ending world poverty, unicorns, whatever it is. Especially ironic considering the people who make up this elite class that go to a ski lodge every year in Switzerland to discuss these matters of how they want to help the plebes and the people, are the people who actually created the conditions in the world through their voracious capitalistic tendencies over decades and centuries. But we can trust them that they're actually going to come in and right the ship. And why wouldn't you trust these people, right? Obviously, that's sarcasm, people. No, how do you go about a plan like this? Well, in the end, it's like anything. You need people out there to sell it. You need marketing. You need all the same things that you would use for a startup, for an entrepreneurial business, or any enterprise company. You need a face, you need a spokesperson, etc. So you pick a few people early on that are going to be able to go out and help you sell this message, these values. And a lot of people speculate about people like Justin Trudeau, Macron, etc. But we talked about in that first video about the Canadian story. We didn't really talk about whether this guy was also then going to be one of the faces, one of the tips of the spear, if you will, to really push this more globalist agenda. And some people would say, well, that's just been a naturally organic occurring result of him being prime minister now for almost 8 years, that he's obviously been profiled in the US. He's an entity that is known around the world. No, that is not the case. It's not just a random happenstance. In fact, the first interview that Justin Trudeau did after winning the election in 2015 was with the New York Times. The first interview he did outside of Canada was with the New York Times. And this is what he said. There is no core identity, no mainstream in Canada. And that consequently makes us the first post-national state. Now, you don't go into an interview with the New York Times winging it, right? You go in knowing exactly the points that you want to make. And clearly for him, right out of the gate, he didn't want to talk about his role in Canada as much as he wanted to let everybody know that he was enthusiastic about being seen as somebody on the global stage. This is 2015, basically week one of his leadership role in Canada. As he said, I'm excited to be on the world stage. I think people are starting to see that I'm actually a reasonable fit for this office. Trudeau and his cabinet have been preoccupied with their global vision of how things ought to be at the expense of how things are in this country, was just one of the many statements that were made about this. So what do we have here? We have, again, evidence that somebody, not just him, but I think the people behind him, are seeing him as, yeah, sure, Canada, Prime Minister, that's just a stepping stone to where I want to be and where I want to be perceived. He ends up as the keynote speaker in Davos in January. To put that in perspective, he won the election, I believe, in October. So in 3 months, he is the keynote speaker at the World Economic Forum in Davos in January of 2016. Well, I don't know about you, Joe, But the people who generally do these things, world leaders, presidents, Bill Gates types, whatever, they got pretty busy schedules. So I would assume you would already have the keynote speaker picked for January 2016 in October and November, because that's how difficult it is logistically to plan the schedules. Oh, we had an opening. Unbelievable. What a coincidence. Justin Trudeau now gets to come in as, a neophyte leader in Canada to be able to brief the entire World Economic Forum on his vision for the world going forward. Interesting. So again, just as a reminder, we talked about this in the last video too, nothing about this guy is random. Nothing about how he became who he is, where he is, what he does. Everything is carefully polished, carefully planned. You could say that about most and all politicians. I will grant you that. But this is a special level of calculated, of duplicitous, of disingenuous, that I would say. So for those of you who don't know the whole Canadian story of Justin Trudeau, prior to becoming Prime Minister in 2015, he famously or infamously had a charity boxing match. He had this war of words with a conservative senator, whose last name Brazo in Canada, who was a kind of a rough and tumble street guy. And, they were going back and forth in the media about, so somehow, some way, they agreed to this charity boxing match, which ends up happening. Not surprisingly, Justin Trudeau is not the favorite. Not a guy I would pick in a fight pretty much in any circumstance. He's a 3-1 underdog to the black belt, Brazo, but ends up winning. Brazo comes out, he kind of, tires himself out too early, and Trudeau ends up sort of winning the long game, pun intended, and beats Brazo in this boxing match. And you can't overstate the importance of what this did for his image, from a guy who's looked at like his father, like an effete intellectual, out of touch with the common man and woman type of thing. Well, all of a sudden, he's a tough guy. He's not just a, pretty boy. He's also, tough. He knows how to whatever, take a punch, deliver, etc. Well, a lot of people thought that was just, again, one of these, random situations that happened that ultimately were fortuitous for his rise to becoming PM. Not so much. So Justin Trudeau is again giving an interview to an influential U.S. media outlet. This is now in 2017. The Rolling Stone cover, you might remember it. Justin on the cover. The headline was, "Why can't this guy be our president?" This was the height of Trump hysteria in the U.S. So this became like the View. Everybody was following it. Oh, Justin Trudeau, why couldn't he? Whatever. So when he's asked about this boxing match that he had in 2013 with Brazo, this is what he says. He says it wasn't random. Trudeau tells the Rolling Stone interviewer, "I wanted somebody who would be a good foil, and we stumbled upon the scrappy, tough guy senator from an indigenous community. He fit the bill." He goes on. He fit the bill. It was a very nice counterpoint. I saw it as the right kind of narrative, the right story to tell. So where do you unpack this, Joe? First of all, this guy is openly bragging about being duplicitous and calculating, and that, no, it's not random. We are, like, he's almost proud of the fact that we used this guy and this situation politically to our own advantage, that this wasn't something that was really just a charity boxing match, whatever. We were very, again, calculated in our planning of this, and has no problem, as somebody who has espoused, the desire to be, sort of the messiah of the indigenous communities in Canada. He's going to come in because he cares like his father, and he's going to fix all the problems, right all the wrongs. Yet this guy says in an interview with the Rolling Stone, he says, we stumbled upon the scrappy, tough guy senator from an indigenous community. He fit the bill. It was a very nice counterpoint to him, meaning what? Meaning you're like this elite white dude who, again, the white collar versus the blue collar, the white versus the indigenous. Like, what do you mean by that? And then, of course, he says he fit the bill. I saw it as the right kind of narrative, the right story to tell. Well, you can imagine Twitter blew up. There's some great tweets of people that were just absolutely shocked that this guy who had been talking so long about caring about Indigenous people would be bragging about going out and selecting this particular guy to lay a beating on him to help make political hay. Are you kidding me? Did that bring him down, Joe? No, it didn't. Unbelievably, he managed to escape that. And of course, he was even passed the torch of being the guy to fix the Indigenous problems in Canada by, royalty here in Canada. Gord Downie, the singer of the Tragically Hip, a hugely famously Canadian band. The Gord Downie was dying of cancer. He was had months to live. They did this final concert. It was one of the most emotional things you ever saw. A third of the country watched this concert. And Gord Downie went out of his way to hug Justin Trudeau. Gord Downie was known as somebody who'd done some great work with Indigenous communities and talked about that being a massively important thing that we all need to think about going forward. So he was essentially passing the torch to Justin Trudeau, say, I trust you. I believe what you're saying, that you're going to be the guy. And again, the Justin Trudeau group took full advantage of this massive media opportunity to again elevate, to create an image. But guess what happened, Joe? He didn't come through, did he? And of course, Indigenous communities across Canada were railing against him years later because they didn't even have clean drinking water on reserves. Again, an example of all style, no substance, but all part of a plan, Joe. Continuing to elevate the guy, talking the talk, not walking the walk. Well, guess who ultimately sees the potential in this guy? Old Uncle Klaus Schwab, from the World Economic Forum, who saw his little protege from 2016's keynote coming on the world stage and demonstrating the chops to be able to be perhaps one of the chosen spokespeople for this agenda. And, this is what he said about that. If you haven't seen it, this is pretty much out in the open as to what Klaus thought of Justin Trudeau and the ability to essentially use him to push through their agenda.
What we are very proud of now, the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina, and so on, is that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are for our actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
So there you have it. And then, of course, well, just because Klaus says that doesn't mean it's true, does it? Doesn't mean Justin's going to go out and start, throwing words around like the Great Reset and whatever. And oh, wait a sec.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
So yes, what does this all mean in the end? Well, as we sit here in the year 2022 and people are debating what is the way forward to this world, this planet we live on, and the almost 8 billion people. Well, we know that there's one worldview that's out there that's not a conspiracy because it's out in the open. They talk about it. They advocate for it. On their website, 2030, you will own nothing and be happy. We're all familiar with that. So this isn't something they're doing necessarily behind closed doors. However, this type of stuff, sure, who's going to go out, plant the seeds, who's going to talk, who's going to be the spokesperson? Yeah, that's not something they advertise, but you can see the evidence of that. In the end, is it a conspiracy? Well, I mean, I guess if you read what a definition of conspiracy, generally where you come across it, is to make an agreement with others, especially in secret, to do an unlawful act. Well, I guess that's the debate point, Joe. Is this a group that is looking to do unlawful acts, or are they just looking to roll out the agenda that they believe is best for the greater good? And of course, as we know, once you've done that, the end justifies the means. Doesn't matter what you do because the end is noble. So in this particular case, is Justin Trudeau participating in this? Is he going about it in an unlawful way? Well, you might see his recent coalition with the NDP party in Canada, the New Democratic Party, forming a coalition to essentially build a moat around the Liberal Party for the next election, making it almost impossible for any challenges. Yeah, could you argue that's an unlawful way around the democratic process? Because people who, again, were part of the NDP party, who voted for the NDP, who might not like Justin Trudeau, well, guess what? Too bad. You essentially voted for the Liberal Party. So when a dictator does these things, or Putin or somebody else who starts to use technicalities and loopholes to be able to create situations that preserve their power, well, we usually freak out. In this case, not so much. So in the end, what is Justin Trudeau? Well, I would argue he's a creation. He's an ambitious, useful idiot, for lack of a better way to say it, who is more than happy to be able to be a stooge for Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. But why, Joe? In the end, you can argue because he's part of an evil cabal behind the scenes with Count Chocula and Mr. Burns all cackling about their world domination plan, or he is somebody who comes from the world of elitism, who grew up elite like all these people, and who really do see themselves as the kind of divine right to rule people. And that, look, who are we kidding? The masses, they need to be led. They might as well be led by people like us. And does he put his head on the pillow at night?
And yeah, so the reason why this is so important for us to discuss is because there's a massive amount of people here in Canada that believe in the democratic process, and that we're seeing the democratic process play out. Not realizing that, you have a prime minister who was essentially voted in with about 30% of the vote, and knowing that after certain moves have been made, whether it was the NDP coalition or whether it was what happened with the Freedom Convoy, that he lost a large portion of that 30% of people, of support. So here you have a guy that hypothetically could continue to be in power, usurp the democratic process, and sort of create this coalition with Jagmeet Singh, who will, at this point, seems to do anything to maintain his sort of political career. And what say will Canadians have over this entire process? It becomes very difficult, or very easy to see that the democratic process is being hijacked at this point by Trudeau and perhaps even Jagmeet. And if there's people behind them, would be them as well.
Right. I was just going to say, an interesting possibility there it's worth looking into. Does Jagmeet Singh show up at the next World Economic Forum? Has he been? Does he get invited? Does he see a bigger global career versus just simply being the leader of the NDP party? Again, what is it that somebody sells to you to form a coalition with them that really benefits their parties? You're going to say you got dental and all these other things for Canadians, and I don't want to gloss over that. For people that need that, that's super important. But in the end, is it possible that he also sees the forest for the trees of what's being laid out as the post-2030 world, and he sees maybe, or has been promised, a role in that? Who knows?
Yeah. Regardless, things are changing. That's the ultimate thing here, and where and what direction they go, as you mentioned, the fork in the road. What the direction they go is I think a lot more up to us as people and what we accept and what we envision than we often think. And it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing for us to come together and say, okay, what would we want this to look like? And I think that's where this collaboration is ultimately going to have to start to go as people, however that looks. But appreciate you coming on. Again, continuing the Trudeau Part 2 breakdown. It was fun as always.
Good stuff, Joe. Be the change you want to see in the world, as they say. Thanks, Joe.